3 weeks. That is how long the human body can survive without food before your organs start shutting down one by one. 3 weeks sounds like a long time until you realize that the average American household has roughly 4 days of groceries in the pantry at any given moment. 4 days. After that, you are standing in a grocery store with empty shelves or walking through a forest surrounded by hundreds of pounds of edible food you cannot identify because nobody ever taught you what to look for. And here is the part that should keep you up at night. Your great-grandparents could walk into any meadow, any forest edge, any riverbank on this continent and feed their families for weeks. They did not need a survival kit. They did not need freeze-dried meals in Mylar bags. They had something better. They had knowledge. Knowledge that kept the Lewis and Clark expedition alive across 8,000 miles of uncharted wilderness. Knowledge that the U.S. Army still prints in field manuals today. Knowledge that indigenous peoples on every inhabited continent refined over thousands of years. And in the space of 2 generations, we lost almost all of it. I am going to show you 20 wild foods you can find and eat to survive virtually anywhere on this planet. These are not exotic superfoods. These are not rare plants you will never see. These are the weeds in your yard, the trees in your park, the roots under your feet, the insects you step over every single day without realizing you are walking past a survival pantry. Each one has been tested, not in a laboratory, but in actual life or death scenarios across centuries of human history. And I have ranked them from useful to absolutely essential, so stick around because number 7 is a food that Union soldiers during the Civil War refused to eat, and hundreds of them died because of that refusal. And number 20 is the single most complete wild food source on the planet, a plant that appears in more military survival manuals than any other. And I guarantee you have walked past it 1,000 times without knowing it could save your life. If any of this matters to you, if feeding your family when the system breaks down matters to you, hit that subscribe button and the bell right now. Because this channel is where frontier wisdom meets modern preparation, and we do not waste your time. All right, let us get into it. Here are 20 wild foods you can eat to survive anywhere, ranked from practical to absolutely life-saving. Number 1, dandelion. The weed your lawn is begging you to eat. There is a certain kind of irony in the fact that Americans spend over $30 billion a year on lawn care, and a significant chunk of that money goes toward killing one of the most nutritious wild plants on the planet. Every part of the dandelion is edible. The leaves, the flowers, the stems, the roots. Every single part. And this is not some marginal survival food you choke down because you have no other choice. Dandelion greens contain over 14,000 international units of vitamin A per 100 grams. To put that in perspective, that is more than a carrot, more than sweet potato, more than almost anything you will find in a grocery store. The calcium content rivals milk. The iron content rivals beef liver. Now let me take you back to the winter of 1620. The Mayflower colonists are dying. Half of them will not make it to spring. The Wampanoag people, who had been eating dandelion greens for generations, eventually taught the surviving colonists which local plants could be eaten. Dandelion was among the first. It was not a delicacy to them. It was a staple, a survival constant, something so reliable it barely deserved mention, the way you might not think to mention that water is wet. The U.S. Army Field Manual, 21-76, the gold standard of military survival literature, lists dandelion as a safe and identifiable wild edible. The SAS Survival Guide does the same. And the reason every serious manual includes it is the same reason your great-grandmother picked it every spring. It is everywhere. It grows on every continent except Antarctica. It survives frost, drought, poor soil, and neglect. You can eat the young leaves raw in a salad. You can boil the older leaves to cut the bitterness. You can roast the root and brew it as a coffee substitute, which is exactly what Confederate soldiers did during the Civil War when the Union blockade cut off coffee supplies. You can fry the flowers in batter, you can dry them for tea. The mistake most people make is waiting too long to harvest. Young dandelion leaves, picked before the plant flowers, are mild and tender. Once the flower blooms, the leaves turn bitter. Not inedible, but harder to enjoy. Boiling them in 2 changes of water fixes that. Your great-grandfather knew this by age 12. Most adults today would walk past a field of dandelions and never once consider that they were looking at a free, unlimited, nutrient-dense food source that required 0 cultivation. That is not ignorance. That is a disconnection that could cost your life. Number 2. Pine needle tea. The frontier's first vitamin pill. Scurvy killed more soldiers, more sailors, and more explorers than bullets and storms combined for most of recorded history. The symptoms start slowly. Fatigue, bleeding gums. Then your old wounds reopen, your teeth loosen, your joints swell. And then you die. All because your body cannot function without vitamin C, and you stopped eating anything that contains it. During the Lewis and Clark expedition of 1804 to 1806, the Corps of Discovery spent months in conditions where fresh fruit and vegetables were impossible to find. What kept them alive, among other things, was a practice they learned from the indigenous peoples they encountered. You take the green needles of a pine tree, most species of the genus Pinus will work. You steep them in hot water for 10 to 15 minutes, and you drink the result. It tastes like a forest, resinous, sharp, faintly citric. But here is what matters. Pine needle tea contains roughly 5 times more vitamin C per volume than lemon juice. 5 times. A single cup a day is enough to prevent scurvy entirely. The U.S. Air Force survival training materials reference pine and spruce needle teas as emergency vitamin C sources. FM 305. 70. The updated Army Survival Manual includes conifer needle tea in its section on wild plant preparation. The reason is simple. Pine trees grow across the entire northern hemisphere, from subarctic Canada to the mountains of North Africa. If you are lost in any temperate or boreal forest on Earth, you are almost certainly within sight of your next dose of vitamin C. No kit required. No foraging expertise needed beyond the ability to identify a pine tree, which most children can do. One warning: avoid yew trees entirely. Yew needles are toxic and can be fatal. If the needles are flat, grow in 2 rows along the branch, and the tree produces red berries, leave it alone. Pine needles are bundled in clusters of 2, 3, or 5, and that distinction is the difference between medicine and poison. Learn it. Burn it into your memory, because when you are cold, hungry, and exhausted, the details are what keep you breathing. Number 3, plantain. The band-aid that grows underfoot. Not the banana. The small, ribbed leaf plant that grows in sidewalk cracks, along trails, in disturbed soil from Maine to Melbourne. Plantago major. If you have a lawn, you have plantain. If you have ever walked through a park, you have stepped on it. And you had no idea you were stepping on one of the most versatile wild edibles and field medicines in the world. The leaves are edible raw when young, though they get tougher and more fibrous as they mature. Cooked, they taste similar to spinach with a slightly more earthy character. But here is where plantain earns its place on this list. Beyond food, a crushed plantain leaf applied directly to an insect bite, a bee sting, or a minor wound acts as a natural poultice. It draws out irritation and reduces swelling. The Lakota and the Cherokee used it for exactly this purpose for centuries before European contact. And when European settlers arrived, they brought their own variety of plantain with them, a plant they called waybread, because it grew along every road and pathway they traveled. The Anglo-Saxons listed it as one of the 9 sacred herbs. FM 21-76 includes plantain among identifiable edibles in temperate zones. It contains vitamin A, vitamin C, and calcium. It is not a calorie-dense food, And that matters, because survival eating is not just about filling your stomach. It is about getting the micronutrients that keep your immune system running and your wounds healing when there is no pharmacy within 100 miles. Plantain does that job. It has done that job for thousands of years on 6 continents. And it is free, everywhere, right now. Number 4. Wild amaranth. The grain the Aztecs built an empire on. Before Cortez arrived in 1519, the Aztec Empire consumed an estimated 20,000 tons of amaranth grain per year. It was not a side dish. It was a foundation. A nutritional pillar that fed armies, sustained cities, and played a central role in religious ceremonies. When the Spanish conquered the Aztecs, they did something that should trouble every prepper alive today. They banned it. They burned the fields. They made cultivation of amaranth punishable by death. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was powerful. A population that can feed itself is a population that is hard to control. Wild amaranth still grows across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The leaves are edible raw or cooked and taste similar to mild spinach. The seeds, when harvested and dried, contain roughly 14% protein and 371 calories per 100 grams. That is competitive with wheat. That is competitive with rice. And it grows as a weed, without irrigation, without fertilizer, in poor soil, in drought conditions, in places where conventional agriculture fails. Here is the practical piece. You can identify amaranth by its tall, upright growth habit, its broad leaves, and its dense seed heads that look like thick, fuzzy spikes at the top of the plant. Harvest the seed heads when they turn brown, dry them, thresh the seeds out by rubbing between your hands, and winnow the chaff. You can boil the grain into porridge, grind it into flour, or pop it like tiny popcorn over a dry pan. The Aztecs mixed it with honey and formed it into cakes. You can do the same with nothing more than a campfire and a flat stone. An empire was built on this food, and it is growing in the vacant lot down the street from your house right now. Number 5. Burdock root. The survival carrot hiding in plain sight. If you have ever come back from a hike with small, round burrs stuck to your socks and your dog's fur, you have already met burdock. Those burrs, incidentally, inspired the invention of Velcro in 1941 when Swiss engineer Georges de Mestral examined them under a microscope. But long before burdock inspired modern fastener technology, it was feeding people. The Ainu people of northern Japan have cultivated burdock root, which they call gobo, for centuries. It is a staple of Japanese cuisine to this day, but the wild version grows across North America, Europe, and Northern Asia, and most people treat it as a nuisance. The first-year root, dug in autumn or early spring before the plant sends up its flower stalk, is a dense, starchy food source with roughly 72 calories per 100 grams. That does not sound like much until you realize that a single burdock root can be over 2 feet long and as thick as your wrist. You peel it, slice it thin, and boil or roast it. The taste is earthy, mildly sweet, somewhere between a potato and an artichoke heart. It stores well when dried and can be rehydrated later. FM 21-76 does not list burdock specifically, but the SAS Survival Guide identifies it as a safe wild root in temperate zones. The key identification feature is the large, heart-shaped leaves and those unmistakable burrs. First-year plants have no flower stalk, just a rosette of large leaves close to the ground with a thick taproot underneath. Second-year plants send up a tall stalk and become woody and inedible. Timing matters. Dig it in the first year, or not at all. That is the kind of detail that separates a meal from wasted effort. Number 6. Clover. The one food that grows on every battlefield in history. Red clover and white clover grow in fields, lawns and meadows across every temperate zone on Earth. There is a reason for that. Clover is a nitrogen fixer. It enriches the soil it grows in, which means it thrives where other plants struggle. And during the Great Depression, when millions of Americans faced genuine food insecurity for the first time in their lives, clover was one of the emergency forage plants that kept families alive in rural areas across the Midwest and Appalachia. The flower heads are edible raw, though they are easier to digest when dried or lightly cooked. The young leaves can be eaten in salads or boiled like greens. Dried clover flowers make a mild, pleasant tea that was a common household beverage in the 19th century. The nutritional profile is modest but real. Protein, vitamin C, calcium, and chromium. It is not a calorie-dense survival food, but it is a reliable source of micronutrients that are easy to find and impossible to misidentify. Almost everyone alive already knows what clover looks like. Here is the part that qualifies clover for this list: availability. During the Civil War, during both World Wars, during every conflict fought on temperate soil, clover was growing on the battlefield. Between the trenches, in the no-man's land, in the fields behind the lines where soldiers foraged when supply chains failed, clover was there. It is still there. And when the next crisis comes, whatever form it takes, clover will be growing in the park a quarter-mile from your house, waiting to be picked by anyone who knows it is food. Number 7. Acorns. The calorie bomb soldiers died refusing to eat. This one haunts me. During the American Civil War, Union troops stationed in the South regularly encountered oak trees loaded with acorns. Thousands and thousands of calories hanging from branches and carpeting the ground, and they did not eat them. Not because acorns are poisonous, they are not, but because raw acorns contain tannins, bitter compounds that make them taste astringent and unpleasant. And soldiers who tried eating them raw assumed they were inedible and moved on. Some of those soldiers died of malnutrition within sight of oak trees. Meanwhile, the Native American peoples of California had been processing acorns as a dietary staple for over 10,000 years. The Miwok, the Pomo, the Yokuts. Acorns were their wheat, their rice, their bread. The process is simple, but non-negotiable. You shell the acorns, grind the nut meat into a coarse meal, and then leach it. Cold water leaching means placing the meal in a basket or cloth in a running stream, and letting the water wash the tannins out over several hours or days. Hot water leaching means boiling the meal in multiple changes of water until the bitterness is gone. Either way, what you are left with is a dense, starchy flour that contains over 500 calories per 100 grams and roughly 6% protein. 500 calories per 100 grams. That is more calorie-dense than rice, more than wheat flour, more than corn. And oak trees produce mast crops, meaning in good years a single mature tree can drop hundreds of pounds of acorns. The SAS Survival Guide lists acorn processing as a critical skill for temperate zone survival. FM 2176 mentions oaks as a food source with proper preparation. The key word is preparation. Raw acorns can cause nausea, kidney irritation, and digestive distress. Leached acorns are a safe, rich, reliable food that sustained civilizations. The difference between those two outcomes is not strength or courage. It is knowledge. The kind of knowledge that gets lost when a culture stops paying attention, and the kind that gets people killed when they need it most and do not have it. Real quick, I want to pause here for a moment. We are 7 items in, and I already know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking about your pantry. You are thinking about how many of these plants grow within walking distance of your front door. You are thinking about the gap between what your grandparents knew and what you know. Good. That is exactly the right response. Because here is something preppers get wrong all the time. They spend thousands of dollars on freeze-dried food, on MREs, on vacuum-sealed everything. And they never once walk into their own backyard and learn to identify 3 edible plants. All that gear runs out. A seed head full of amaranth does not. A field of dandelions does not. An oak tree that has been dropping acorns for 200 years does not. Skills outlast supplies every single time. And what is coming in the next 13 items is going to take everything you thought you knew about wild food and turn it on its head. Especially number 20. I saved it for last for a reason, and when you hear it, you are going to wonder why nobody ever told you about it before. Check the description below for a full list of field manuals and foraging resources. Now let us keep going. Number 8. Stinging nettle, the plant that punishes the ignorant and feeds the wise. There is a reason every foraging instructor in the world teaches nettle first. It is the perfect test. If you can learn to respect it, harvest it properly, and prepare it correctly, you can handle any wild food on this planet. If you cannot, the nettle lets you know immediately, because the tiny hairs on its stems and leaves inject formic acid into your skin on contact, producing a burning sting that lasts anywhere from minutes to hours. But once you blanch nettle leaves in boiling water for 60 seconds, those stinging hairs collapse. The acid neutralizes, and what you are left with is a green vegetable that contains roughly 25% protein by dry weight. That is higher than any domesticated leafy green. It also contains iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A, C, and K. During World War II, in occupied Europe, particularly in the Netherlands during the hunger winter of 1944 to 1945, nettle was a critical survival food for civilian populations whose food supplies had been cut off by the German blockade. Families who knew how to collect and prepare it had access to a free, abundant protein source. Families who did not went hungry. Harvest with thick gloves, cut the top 4 to 6 inches of young growth, blanch, steam, or dry the leaves thoroughly. Once processed, you can use them anywhere you would use cooked spinach. Soups, stews, teas, side dishes. The military does not list nettle by name in FM 2176, but FM 305. 70 references stinging plants that become edible with proper heat treatment. The principle is universal. Do not fear the sting. Respect it, work around it, and eat well. Number 9. Lamb's quarters, the spinach substitute that outperforms spinach. Chenopodium album. This plant goes by a dozen names across a dozen cultures, and every single one of those cultures considered it food. In India, it is called bathua and is still eaten in rural households. In England, it was called fat hen because chickens that fed on it grew plump and healthy. In the Americas, it was a common garden weed that colonial families harvested alongside their cultivated crops rather than pulling it out. Here is why it belongs on this list. Gram for gram, lamb's quarters contains more vitamin A, more vitamin C, more calcium, and more protein than cultivated spinach. FM 21-76 includes chenopodium among safe wild edibles in temperate and tropical zones. The leaves are edible raw when young and should be cooked when mature, as older leaves contain oxalic acid that cooking neutralizes. You can identify it by its diamond-shaped leaves with a slightly dusty whitish coating on the undersides, especially on new growth. It grows in disturbed soil, gardens, farm edges, roadsides, and construction sites. Anywhere humans have turned the earth, lamb's quarters follows. It is a weed that is more nutritious than most of what you deliberately plant in a garden, and it costs nothing, demands nothing, and grows whether you want it to or not. Number 10. Wild garlic and ramps, the mountain man's secret antibiotic. When Jim Bridger trapped beaver along the rivers of the Rocky Mountains in the 1820s and 1830s, he lived for months in wilderness with no access to medicine, no doctor, and no supply line. What he and the other fur trappers did have was an intimate knowledge of wild alliums, the family that includes wild garlic, wild onions, and ramps. These plants grow along stream banks, in moist forests, and on shaded hillsides across North America, Europe, and Asia. You can smell them before you see them. That sharp, unmistakable garlic or onion scent when you crush a leaf is your confirmation. Wild alliums contain allicin, the same compound that gives cultivated garlic its antimicrobial properties. Studies have shown allicin inhibits the growth of bacteria, fungi, and certain parasites. For a mountain man with a wound that could go septic, wild garlic was not a condiment. It was a field antibiotic, eaten raw, applied as a poultice, or brewed into a strong tea and used to wash wounds. The calories are minimal, roughly 34 per 100 grams for ramps, but the medicinal and flavoring value is enormous. When you are eating bland survival food for weeks on end, the morale boost of garlic or onion flavor in your stew is not trivial. Military survival psychology recognizes that food palatability directly affects morale and caloric intake. Soldiers who find their food disgusting eat less, even when they are starving. Wild garlic fixes that problem and fights infection at the same time. Number 11. Chicory root, the coffee that kept the Confederacy alive. In 1861, when the Union naval blockade choked off supply routes to the South, Confederate states lost access to imported coffee almost overnight. Coffee was not a luxury for Civil War soldiers. It was the fuel that kept exhausted men functional through forced marches, overnight watches, and the grinding monotony of camp life. When it disappeared, morale cratered. The solution came from a practice that had been common in France and Belgium for decades. You dig the root of the chicory plant, Cicorium intybus, the one with the pale blue flowers that grows along roadsides, across most of the United States. You clean it, chop it into small pieces, roast it slowly until it turns dark brown, and then grind it and brew it exactly like coffee. The taste is bitter, earthy, and close enough to coffee that Confederate soldiers and civilians adopted it as a staple. New Orleans blended chicory with coffee long before the war, and the tradition persists there today. But chicory root is more than a coffee substitute. It contains inulin, a prebiotic fiber that supports gut health, and it provides modest calories when roasted. It has been used as a food and medicine in Europe since at least Roman times. Pliny the Elder mentioned it. Foraging it is straightforward. The plant grows wild in disturbed areas, roadsides and fields throughout temperate North America and Europe. First-year roots are best, and in a prolonged grid-down scenario, when your coffee supply runs out and fatigue becomes your most dangerous enemy. Knowing how to make a functional, hot, bitter beverage from a roadside weed is not a minor skill. It is a sanity saver. Number 12. Prickly pear cactus. Desert survival's ultimate paradox, food and water in a single package. The Opuntia genus grows across the American Southwest, Mexico, the Mediterranean, parts of Africa, and Australia. The Comanche and the Apache ate it for centuries. The pads, called nopales, and the fruits, called tunas, are both edible. And here is the part that matters most in a desert survival situation. Prickly pear pads are roughly 88% water by weight. In an environment where dehydration kills faster than starvation, finding a food source that also hydrates you is like finding a gas station that also serves dinner. The fruits contain about 41 calories per 100 grams, with vitamin C and magnesium. The pads can be sliced, boiled, or grilled after you remove the spines and the tiny hair-like glochids, which are the real hazard. Glochids are almost invisible, and they embed in your skin and cause irritation for days. Use a knife to scrape the pad surface clean, or hold it over a flame to burn off the glochids before handling. The Army's survival training for desert environments references Opuntia as a food and moisture source. SERE training in desert zones includes cactus preparation. It is not comfortable food. The mucilaginous texture of the cooked pads takes getting used to. But comfortable and alive are two different categories. And in the desert, prickly pear is the difference between them. Number 13. Purslane, the omega-3 powerhouse growing in your driveway. Portulaca oleracea is a low-growing succulent weed with thick, reddish stems and small paddle-shaped leaves that grows in sidewalk cracks, garden beds, and driveways across the world. It has been cultivated for at least 4,000 years. Persians ate it, Greeks ate it, Indians ate it. The only culture that seems confused about eating it is modern America, where it is treated exclusively as a weed. Purslane contains more omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid than any other leafy plant ever tested. 300 to 400 milligrams per 100 grams. It also contains all 6 dietary minerals, beta-carotene and vitamins A, B, and C. It is edible raw, with a pleasant lemony crunch, or cooked into soups and stir-fries. It thrives in heat, drought, and poor soil. It grows fast. It regrows after cutting, and in a survival scenario where your diet is heavy on starch and protein, but missing essential fatty acids, purslane fills a gap that can prevent serious nutritional deficiencies over time. The ancient Greeks called it andrachne, and considered it a food of the common people. Hippocrates prescribed it. Gandhi listed it among his favorite foods. And it is growing right now in the crack between your driveway and your garage. Number 14. Birch bark and birch sap. The tree that gives you bread, sugar, and medicine. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia, the Cree of Canada, the Siberians of the Russian taiga. Every culture that lived among birch trees learned the same lesson. This tree will keep you alive if you know how to ask. In early spring, before the leaves emerge, birch trees pump sap from their roots to their branches. You can tap a birch tree the same way you tap a maple. A small hole, a spout, a container. Birch sap is thin, faintly sweet, and drinkable directly. It contains about 18 calories per liter, along with manganese, zinc, calcium, and iron. It is not a calorie bomb, but it is clean, safe water with vitamins in an environment where finding drinkable water can mean the difference between life and death. The Sami people collected it in vast quantities every spring and fermented it, reduced it into syrup, or drank it fresh. But the inner bark of the birch, the cambium layer just beneath the outer bark, is edible too. You can dry it, grind it into flour, and bake it into a flatbread. Emergency bark bread has sustained northern peoples during famines for millennia. The SAS Survival Guide references birch as a multi-purpose survival tree for northern environments. The calories from bark flour are modest, but when combined with the sap, the medicinal properties of birch leaf tea for urinary and kidney support, and the fact that birch bark is one of the best natural fire-starting materials on the planet, you begin to understand why indigenous Arctic peoples considered this tree sacred. One tree. Water, food, medicine, fire. That is not a coincidence. That is 10,000 years of wisdom encoded into a relationship with a single species. We are getting close to the ones that change how you think about wild food entirely. If you have made it this far, you already understand more about foraging than 95% of the population. And that is not a compliment, that is a warning, because it means 95% of people around you will have no idea how to feed themselves when the supply chain breaks. The next 6 items are going to take us into territory that surprises even experienced preppers. We are talking about foods most Westerners would never consider. Foods that have been hiding in plain sight for centuries, and one, the last one, that might be the single most important wild food on Earth. If you are finding value in this, drop a comment below with the wild food you have already tried. And if you have not tried any yet, that is your signal. This is not entertainment. This is education you might need. Number 15. Insects, crickets, and grubs. The protein source 80% of the world already eats. Here is where most Western viewers lose their nerve, and that reaction, that disgust, is the most dangerous survival instinct you carry. Because it is not an instinct, it is a cultural bias, and it could kill you. 2 billion people on this planet eat insects as a regular part of their diet. Not as a dare, not as a stunt, as food. The Thai eat crickets and silk moth larvae. The Aboriginal Australians have harvested witchetty grubs, the larvae of cossid moths, for over 60,000 years. Aboriginal bush-tucker knowledge represents the longest continuous food tradition on Earth, and insects are central to it. In sub-Saharan Africa, caterpillar harvesting is a multi-billion-dollar seasonal industry. FM 2176 states it plainly. Insects are the most abundant and accessible animal food source in a survival situation. Crickets contain 60 to 70% protein by dry weight. Grubs are rich in fat, which is the macronutrient hardest to find in the wild, and the one your body craves most when calorie-deprived. A handful of roasted crickets provides more protein per gram than the same weight of beef. SERE school trains service members to overcome the psychological barrier to eating insects, because the military knows that in a prolonged survival scenario, the person who eats bugs lives, and the person who refuses dies. Remove the legs and wings to avoid irritation in the throat. Avoid brightly colored insects, which often signal toxicity. Avoid anything that smells foul. Cook them when possible. Roast them over coals, boil them in water, or dry them in the sun. Your revulsion is not your body protecting you. It is your culture betraying you. Override it. Number 16. Thistle. The plant covered in armor that is soft on the inside. During the highland clearances of the 18th and 19th centuries, Scottish families were driven off their ancestral lands by force. Homes were burned. Communities were shattered. And in the mountains and moors, where displaced families tried to survive, thistle was one of the wild foods that kept them alive. The same plant that serves as the national emblem of Scotland was also its emergency pantry. The spines are a deterrent to the uninformed, but strip the outer layer of the stem, and the inner core is tender and edible, with a taste similar to celery. The roots of bull thistle and other Cirsium species can be peeled and roasted like a parsnip. The flower heads, harvested before they open fully, can be boiled and eaten like a small artichoke, which makes sense because artichokes are thistles, domesticated and bred for size over centuries, but thistles all the same. The relationship is direct. Thistles grow across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia and Africa. They colonize disturbed ground, meadows, roadsides, and pastures. Their aggressive growth and spiny armor mean they are almost never sprayed with herbicides or picked clean by competition. In a crisis, when cultivated food is gone and foraging pressure is high, the foods that survive are the ones nobody else wants to deal with. Thistle is exactly that. Armored, overlooked, and waiting for the person who knows what is inside. Number 17. Kudzu, the invasive monster that could feed a city. Pueraria montana was brought to the United States from Japan in 1876 for the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. The government promoted it as animal fodder and erosion control. Then it escaped. Kudzu now covers an estimated 300,000 acres in the southeastern United States and grows at a rate that can reach 1 foot per day during peak summer. It smothers trees, collapses structures, and costs millions in management efforts every year. And almost nobody realizes you can eat it. The young leaves are edible raw or cooked, similar to spinach. The flowers can be battered and fried or made into jelly. And the root, which can grow to the size of a human torso, contains roughly 10% starch by weight. In Japan, kudzu root starch, called kuzu, has been used in cooking and traditional medicine for over 2,000 years. It is used as a thickener, a base for teas, and a treatment for fevers and digestive issues. In a survival scenario in the American Southeast, the sheer volume of available kudzu biomass means you are literally surrounded by food. You cannot walk a mile in Georgia without passing enough kudzu to feed a family for a week. The preparation is straightforward. Young shoots and leaves can be sautéed or boiled. Roots need to be dug, washed, pulped, and the starch settled out of the water, a process nearly identical to making potato starch. It takes effort, but the resource is unlimited, free, and aggressively regenerating. The most hated plant in America might be the most useful one in a crisis. Number 18. Rose hips. The vitamin bomb the British military issued to every soldier's family. In 1941, with German U-boats cutting off citrus imports to Britain, the Ministry of Health faced a scurvy crisis. Citrus fruit had been the nation's primary source of vitamin C, and suddenly it was gone. The solution was not a pill. It was not a supplement. It was a hedge fruit that had been growing along every British lane and field boundary for centuries. Rose hips, the small red or orange fruit left behind after a rose bloom fades, contain roughly 426 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams. Oranges contain 53. That is an 8-to-1 ratio. The British government organised a national volunteer collection effort. School children, Women's Institute members, and civilians gathered hundreds of tons of wild rose hips each autumn. They were processed into national rosehip syrup and distributed to families across the country. It was not optional. It was a public health intervention that prevented a nationwide deficiency disease during wartime. You can make the syrup yourself. Chop the hips, boil them in water, strain through a fine cloth to remove the irritating hairs inside the fruit, add sugar if available, and reduce. The resulting syrup stores for months. You can also dry rose hips and brew them into tea, which is one of the most pleasant wild teas you will ever taste, mildly tart, slightly fruity, and packed with more vitamin C than you could get from a glass of orange juice. Rose bushes grow wild across North America, Europe, and Asia, and once you know what rose hips are, you will see them everywhere in autumn. Small red lanterns hanging from bushes along every fence line and trail edge, advertising their value to anyone who recognizes them. Number 19. Kelp and seaweed, the ocean's oldest survival food. While everything else on this list grows on land, this entry opens up the entire coastline as a food source. And given that 70% of the Earth's surface is water, ignoring marine plants in a survival context is ignoring the majority of the planet. Humans have eaten seaweed for at least 14,000 years. Archaeological evidence from Monteverde in Chile shows that the earliest known Americans were harvesting and eating 9 species of seaweed. In Japan, nori, kombu, and wakame are dietary staples. In Korea, myeokguk, a seaweed soup, is the traditional food given to mothers after childbirth because of its high mineral content. In Ireland and Scotland, dulce has been harvested from coastal rocks for at least 1,200 years. Kelp and other edible seaweeds are extraordinarily rich in iodine, a mineral essential for thyroid function that is almost impossible to find in a land-based survival diet. They also contain calcium, iron, magnesium, and vitamins A, B, C, and K. Kelp fronds can be eaten raw, dried, or cooked into soups and stews. Dulse can be pan-fried until crisp and tastes remarkably like bacon. The caloric content is low, roughly 43 calories per 100 grams for raw kelp, but the mineral density is unmatched by any land plant. If you are near a coast, any coast, edible seaweed is available year-round. Harvest from clean water, away from industrial runoff. Avoid blue-green algae in freshwater, which can be toxic. But brown, red, and green marine algae from ocean shorelines are almost universally safe. The Mongolians, ironically a landlocked steppe people, traded for dried seaweed along Silk Road routes because they understood that the minerals it provided were unavailable in their meat and dairy diet. When a landlocked culture goes out of its way to acquire a food, you should pay attention to why. And here we are at number 20. The one I saved for last because it is, without question, the single most complete wild food source on this planet. And when I tell you what it is, you are going to be angry that nobody ever taught you this. Number 20. Cattail. The supermarket of the swamp. Typha latifolia. If I could teach you only one wild food for the rest of your life, it would be this one. Not because it is the most exotic, not because it requires impressive skill, but because every single part of the cattail plant is edible, in every season, on every continent except Antarctica, and no other wild plant comes close to matching that kind of total, year-round caloric reliability. Let me walk you through it season by season, because this is important. In early spring, the young shoots emerge from the water or muddy ground. You pull them up, peel back the outer leaves, and eat the tender white core raw. It tastes like a mild cucumber. Some people call it Cossack asparagus because Russian Cossacks ate it as a field vegetable during campaigns. In late spring, the green flower heads appear, the immature cattail spikes. These can be boiled and eaten like corn on the cob. The taste is starchy, mild, and satisfying. In early summer, those flower heads produce massive amounts of bright yellow pollen. You shake the pollen into a bag, and what you collect is a protein-rich flour that contains roughly 266 calories per 100 grams. You can mix it with water and cook it into flatbread on a hot rock. No grain required, no cultivation. Just walk to the nearest marsh. In autumn and winter, the roots are the prize. Cattail rhizomes are thick, starchy, and can be dug from the mud, washed, peeled, and processed into a flour by crushing the fibers in water and letting the starch settle. That starch is dense, calorie-rich, and stores well when dried. A single acre of cattail marsh can produce more edible starch per year than a single acre of corn, wheat, or potatoes. Read that again. More than corn, more than wheat, more than potatoes. And it requires zero planting, zero irrigation, zero fertilizer, and zero maintenance. FM 2176 lists cattail as a primary wild food source. The SAS Survival Guide dedicates specific attention to it. SERE training includes cattail identification and preparation. It appears in more military survival manuals than any other single plant species. The reason is simple. It solves the calorie problem. In a survival situation, your number one enemy after water is caloric deficit. Your body burns roughly 2,000 calories a day, just existing, and more if you are active, which in a survival situation you are. Wild greens and berries provide vitamins but rarely enough calories to sustain you. Cattail provides both. Calories, carbohydrates, some protein from the pollen, and micronutrients across the board. But cattail gives you more than food. The leaves can be woven into mats, baskets, and crude shelters. The dried seed fluff, the brown cotton-like material that bursts from mature heads, is one of nature's best insulation materials. You can stuff it into clothing for warmth, or use it as tinder for fire starting. The gel at the base of young leaves has mild antiseptic properties and can be applied to cuts and burns. Food, shelter material, insulation, fire starter, and medicine. From one plant, growing in every marsh, pond edge, ditch, and wetland, from Canada to Argentina, from Scotland to Korea. The Paiute, the Ojibwe, the Maori of New Zealand, all of them built parts of their food systems around cattail or closely related species. Genesis 1:29 says, "I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth." You would be hard-pressed to find a better example of that promise than cattail. It is everywhere. It feeds everyone, and it asks nothing in return, except that you know it is there. The fact that most modern people could walk past a cattail marsh every day for 40 years and never once realize they were looking at a complete survival food system tells you everything you need to know about how disconnected we have become. This is not wilderness survival trivia. This is the most important wild food on the planet, growing in every temperate and tropical wetland on Earth, and it is free. 20 wild foods, Thousands of years of knowledge behind every single one. From the dandelion in your front yard to the cattail in the marsh behind the shopping centre, every one of these foods was tested by people whose lives depended on getting it right. Not in a test kitchen, not in a laboratory, in the field, in the cold, in the hunger, in the real. And here is the thing that should sit with you after this. Our ancestors were not tougher than we are. They were not built from different material. They were prepared. They carried knowledge the way we carry phones. It was always with them, always accessible, always ready. And we are not weaker than they were. We are just disconnected. Disconnected from the ground under our feet. Disconnected from the plants that grow without permission all around us. Disconnected from a food system that existed for 10,000 years before the first grocery store opened its doors. Modern fragility is not about physical strength. It is about dependence. Dependence on supply chains that run 7,000 miles long and break when a single ship gets stuck in a canal. Dependence on refrigeration, on processing, on packaging, on systems that are exactly one major disruption away from failure. And when those systems fail, the only thing standing between your family and real hunger is what you know. So here is what I want you to do this week. Not next month. Not when things get bad. This week, pick one food from this list. Just one. Walk outside, find it, identify it, and learn it. Dandelion is the easiest start. Pine needle tea if you have conifers nearby. Cattail if you are near a wetland. Learn one. Practice it. Then come back and learn the next one. Because the time to learn is not when you are desperate. The time is now, while the lights are on and the grocery stores are full, and you still have the luxury of making mistakes without consequences. Every skill on this list exists because someone, somewhere, at some point in history, needed it to survive and passed it forward so the next generation would not have to learn it the hard way. That chain of knowledge survived ice ages, wars, famines, and empires. It almost did not survive 2 generations of convenience. Do not let it die with us. I want to hear from you. Are you team forager, learning to live off what the land provides? Or are you team stockpiler, trusting your pantry and your supplies? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me which wild food surprised you the most. If you made it to the end of this one, you are serious about preparation. And this channel was built for people like you. Hit subscribe, hit the bell. Check the description for links to field manuals, foraging guides, and resources that go deeper into every food we covered today. Share this with someone in your family who needs to hear it, because this knowledge was never meant for one person. It was meant for families, for communities, for the people you love. Your great-grandparents fed their families from the land under their feet. The land has not changed. The food is still there. The only thing missing is the knowledge. And now you have it. What you do with it is up to you.